My name is Emeka, and I want you to understand something before I tell you this story. I grew up in my father's house, not as his son, as his burden. At least, that is what my stepmother made sure I understood from the very first day she walked through that door with her 2 children and her big smile and her quiet, systematic plan to erase me from everything that should have been mine. I was 7 years old when my mother died. 7 years old, and the world was still small enough that I thought love was something that stayed, something permanent, something you could count on, the way you count on the sun coming up in the morning. My mother had been that for me, warm and certain and always there. And then she was gone. And 6 months later, my father brought home Auntie Ngozi. I want to tell you about Auntie Ngozi the way she appeared to everyone else, because this is important. To everyone else, she was a good woman, a kind woman. She cooked well. She kept a clean house. She went to church every Sunday and sang in the choir and smiled at the pastor and greeted the neighbors with warmth. Everyone said my father had done well for himself. Everyone said I was lucky to have a new mother. What happened behind the walls of that house, nobody saw. Or if they saw, they chose not to look directly at it. Let me tell you what my life looked like from the inside. Her children, Chidi and Amara, had a bedroom. I slept in the room off the kitchen that had been used for storage before they arrived. They had a bedroom with a window. Mine had a small, high opening that let in no light and one thin mattress on the floor. They ate first, always. Whatever was left was mine. I am not talking about small children's portions. I am talking about nights when what was left was not enough, and I learned to fill the empty space with water and sleep. They went to school in the morning dressed in clean uniforms that Auntie Ngozi pressed herself. I went to school in whatever I could find that was clean, which was sometimes not very much. By the time I was 9, the other children at school had noticed the difference. Children notice these things. They are not kind about what they notice. And my father, I want to be careful here because I have spent many years being careful about how I speak about him. He was not a cruel man. I want to say that clearly. He was not the kind of man who enjoyed seeing me suffer. He was something perhaps more complicated and in some ways more painful than that. He was a man who loved his peace more than he loved the truth. A man who saw what was happening in his house and chose every single day to see something else instead. He looked at me sometimes in a way that told me he knew. A quick look there and gone, like a man glancing at something that makes him uncomfortable and then looking away. He would bring me something small sometimes, a sweet, a pencil, once a small book about animals that I kept for years because it was the clearest proof I had that somewhere in him he knew I was his child and it cost him something that I suffered. But he never said anything. He never changed anything. And I learned slowly the particular lesson that a child learns when the person who is supposed to protect them chooses comfort instead. I learned that I could not wait to be saved. I could not wait for someone to notice and intervene. I could not afford the luxury of believing that fairness was something that arrived on its own. I would have to build it myself. Let me tell you about the thing that saved me. Not a person. A library. There was a public library 3 streets from my father's house, small, dusty, with books that had been handled so many times the spines were soft and the pages were the color of old tea. I started going there when I was 8 because it was warm and quiet and nobody looked at me the way the children at school looked at me. The librarian was an old man named Mr. Adeyemi who wore the same grey cardigan every day and who, after 2 weeks of watching me come in every afternoon and sit in the same corner, simply put a stack of books on the table beside me without saying anything and went back to his desk. That was the entirety of our communication for 3 months. He put books on the table. I read them. He never asked me anything. He never explained anything. He just kept putting books there. By the time I was 10, I had read everything in that library twice. By 11, Mr. Adeyemi was ordering books from other libraries because I had finished his. I read about mathematics and history and science and other countries and other ways of living. I read about people who had been in impossible situations and had found their way out of them, not by luck, but by understanding, by knowing something that other people around them did not know. I understood from those books that knowledge was the one thing Auntie Ngozi could not take from me. She could take my food and my space and my comfort and my father's attention. She could not take what I put in my head. So I put everything I could in my head. I will tell you about the day I understood fully what I was dealing with. I was 12 years old. There was a scholarship, a real one, a competitive one that covered full fees and boarding and books. My teacher, Mrs. Okonkwo, called me aside after class and told me about it. She said, "Emeka, I want you to apply." She said, "I have been watching you for 2 years and I think you can win it." I went home that afternoon with the application form in my bag, feeling something I had not felt in a long time. Something that sat in my chest like a small warm light. Hope. That specific, fragile, terrifying variety of hope that comes when you can see a door and you believe for the first time that it might open for you. I showed my father the form at dinner. He looked at it. He looked at me. And then he looked at Auntie Ngozi. That look, that one look, that was when I understood everything I needed to understand about the structure of my life and who held power in it. Auntie Ngozi smiled. She said, "Of course Emeka should apply." She said it warmly, with her church voice, with the smile she used when other people were watching. And then that night, after my father had gone to bed, she came to the room off the kitchen where I slept, and she stood in the doorway and she said quietly, "If you apply for that scholarship, I will make sure your father knows you stole money from my bag last month." I had not stolen anything. We both knew I had not stolen anything. She said, "You can apply if you like, but think carefully." She left. I lay on my thin mattress in the dark and I thought carefully. I thought about what she was capable of. I had seen over 5 years exactly what she was capable of. The small cruelties that left no marks. The way she could arrange a story so that it made complete sense and I was always the problem at the center of it. I thought about what my father would do if she said that to him, which version of the truth he would choose to believe. And then I thought about something else. I thought about the library, about Mr. Adeyemi and his grey cardigan and the books he kept on him for me, about Mrs. Okonkwo who pulled me aside after class because she believed I could win something. I thought, there are people in this world who see me. Not many, but some, and that has to be enough. I did not apply for the scholarship that year, but I studied for it. Every night after everyone had slept, by the light that came through my small high window from the street lamp outside, I studied for it, because the scholarship existed every year, and Auntie Ngozi could not threaten what she did not know was coming. I applied the following year. I told no one except Mrs. Okonkwo. I sat the examination in a school hall 20 minutes from my house on a Saturday morning while Auntie Ngozi thought I was running an errand for her in the market. I came home with the groceries and the change accounted for to the exact kobo, and I gave her the receipt, and I said nothing. 3 weeks later, Mrs. Okonkwo pulled me aside at school. She had a letter in her hand. She was smiling in a way I had never seen from her before. Not her usual controlled teacher smile, but something wider, something that reached her eyes and stayed there. She said, "You won." I stood in the corridor of that school and I held the letter and I read my name at the top of it and I thought about my mother. I thought about her the way I always thought about her, not with clear memories because I had been too young and the years had softened the edges of everything, but with a feeling, a warmth, a sense of presence that I had carried with me since I was 7 years old, like a small flame cupped in both hands. I thought, I did this for you, and I thought, I am not finished. Going home that afternoon was one of the hardest things I have ever done, not because I was afraid. I had spent years learning not to be afraid of Auntie Ngozi, but because what was coming was going to be a confrontation I had no way of controlling the outcome of, and I had never in my life been in a situation where the result was this important and this uncertain. My father was home. That was unusual for a Tuesday afternoon. He was sitting in the main parlor with a cup of tea, reading a newspaper. I stood in the doorway. I said, "Papa, I have something to show you." He looked up. I gave him the letter. He read it. His face changed in the reading of it, a slow change, something moving behind his eyes that I watched carefully, trying to understand what it meant. When he finished, he looked at me over the top of the letter. He said, "You won a scholarship." I said, "Yes, Papa." He said, "How long have you been preparing for this?" I said, "1 year." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "And you didn't tell me." I looked at him. I thought about everything I could say in response to that question. All the true things, all the things that happened in his house while he was choosing not to see them, all the small, deliberate cruelties that were practiced on me by a woman he had brought in and given authority over my life. All the years of making myself small and making myself useful and making myself invisible so there would be less for anyone to take from me. I said, "I wanted to be sure first." My father looked at me for a long moment. Something in his face. My father looked at me for a long moment, something in his face that I had not seen before, something uncomfortable and complicated that I would understand better years later when I had more language for it. It was guilt. Not the simple guilt of a man who has done something wrong, the deeper, more corrosive guilt of a man who has allowed something wrong to continue for years and has never once found the courage to stop it. He said, "I am proud of you, Emeka." 3 words. 3 words that I had been waiting for since I was 7 years old. And they were real. I knew they were real. I could hear that they were real. But they were also 12 years too late, and there was nothing either of us could do about that. I said, "Thank you, Papa," and I went to pack my things for boarding school. Auntie Ngozi did not speak to me the evening I left. She stood in the kitchen doorway and watched me carry my bag to the car with her arms crossed and her face very still, and her eyes doing the particular calculation I had learned to recognize over the years, measuring, always measuring, what something was going to cost her. She had not been able to stop me. That was new. In 12 years, every time she had wanted to stop me, she had stopped me. And now here was a letter from an institution larger than her, with my name on it, and a car at the gate to take me somewhere she could not follow. I did not look at her when I left, not because I was afraid to, because she did not deserve my attention in that moment. What was mine, and I was taking it, and there was nothing left to say. Secondary school was the first time in my life I understood what it felt like to simply be a child. Not a burden, not a problem to be managed, not someone whose existence was an inconvenience to be minimized, just a student in a school with teachers who cared whether I was learning and peers who competed with me, and a dormitory room I shared with 3 other boys who knew nothing about where I came from and cared only about who I was now. I worked with the particular ferocity of someone who has been waiting a very long time to do exactly this. I topped my class in the first term, in the second, in the third. I developed a reputation among the teachers as the kind of student who asked the question after the lesson that showed he had been thinking about the lesson while everyone else was already thinking about lunch. I wrote to my father occasionally. He wrote back, short letters, careful letters, the letters of a man who has something he wants to say but does not know how to say it. He told me that Chidi was doing well, that Amara had been ill but was better, that the house was the same. He never said anything about Auntie Ngozi directly. I noticed this. I did not comment on it. I graduated at the top of my class. I won another scholarship, this one for university. I studied economics at the University of Lagos and then law at the same institution, because by the time I was studying economics, I understood that knowledge without the ability to protect it was incomplete. I understood property law and contract law and inheritance law with a specificity that my lecturers found unusual in a student who had not come from a legal family. They did not know that I had been thinking about inheritance since I was 12 years old, standing in a corridor holding a letter, understanding for the first time that there were systems in the world, and that systems could work for you or against you, and the difference was whether you understood them. I understood them.
I came home 6 years after I had left for secondary school. I was 25. I had a law degree and a position at a small firm in Lagos and a rented room in Yaba and a life that was modest but entirely my own. I came home because my father wrote me a letter, not his usual careful short letter, but a long one, longer than anything he had ever written me, and the handwriting was different, slower, less certain. He was sick. He had been sick for some time, he said, and he had not wanted to worry me while I was studying, but now he thought I should know. He thought I should come. I took the bus from Lagos on a Friday evening and arrived in the early hours of Saturday morning. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Most things do when you have grown. Auntie Ngozi opened the door. For a moment we simply looked at each other across the threshold, her in her housecoat, me with my bag, the two of us standing in the particular silence of people who have a long history and no language for it. She said, "Your father is sleeping. Come in." I came in. The house was exactly the same and completely different in the way that houses are when time has passed and the people in them have changed even if the furniture has not. I sat in the parlor and I looked at the walls and I thought about the boy who lived in the room off the kitchen and read by the light of a street lamp and built himself in secret. In the morning, I sat with my father. He was thinner than I had ever seen him. The illness had taken something from him, not just weight, but something harder to name, a substance, a solidity. He looked at me when I came into the room with eyes that were still sharp and still his, and still, underneath everything, guilty in the way they had been guilty since I was 13 years old, and he said, "I am proud of you," and meant it, and known it was not enough. We talked. Really talked for perhaps the first time in our lives. He asked me about Lagos, about my work, about what I wanted. I answered him honestly because there was no longer a reason not to. He was sick and I was grown, and the time for managed conversations was finished. At one point he said, "I was not a good father to you." I looked at him. I thought about all the true things I could say. Then I said, "You were the father you were able to be." He was quiet for a long time after that. Then he said, "I want to talk to you about the will." What he told me I am going to tell you plainly, because plainly is the only way it makes sense. My father had property, land in the village where he had been born, that had been in the Obi family for 3 generations, a house, some savings. Not enormous wealth, but real wealth, the kind that is built slowly over a lifetime and that means something because of what it cost to build it. He had made a will years ago, he said, when he first married Auntie Ngozi. He had made the will she expected him to make, the will that provided for her and for Chidi and Amara, the will that treated me as secondary, as an afterthought, as the first son who was there but not quite all the way there. He said, "I have changed it." I looked at him. He said, "I changed it 2 months ago. My lawyer has the document. I wanted you to know before. I wanted to tell you myself." He told me what the new will said. I sat and I listened, and I kept my face still the way I had learned to keep it still in that house from the time I was very small, because the alternative was to show everything, and I had never in my life been able to afford to show everything. When he finished, I said, "Papa, you don't have to do this." He said, "I know I don't have to. I want to. I should have done many things I didn't do. I cannot fix all of them, but I can fix this one." I sat with my father for a long time that day. We did not talk very much after that. We did not need to. He slept in his chair and I sat beside him, and I looked at the man he had been and the man he had become, and I thought about the complicated, insufficient, late-arriving love that sat between us, and the fact that it was still, in spite of everything, love.
My father died 11 weeks later. I will not go into all of that. What I will tell you is that the week after the funeral, when his lawyer came to the house to read the will, Auntie Ngozi sat across the room from me, with Chidi on one side and Amara on the other. And she looked at me with those measuring eyes that I had known since I was 7 years old.
and she was calculating. She was calculating the same thing she had always calculated: what it was going to cost her, what she could do about it, how she was going to manage this the way she had managed everything else in that house for 18 years. The lawyer read the will. I watched her face as he read it. That face that I had known longer than almost any other face in my life, that had smiled at me with warmth in front of other people and looked at me with cold calculation when we were alone, that had threatened me in doorways and taken from me in small daily ways for years and years and years. I watched it change. I want to tell you that I felt triumph in that moment. I want to tell you that I felt the satisfaction of someone who has waited a long time for justice and has finally watched it arrive. And yes, there was something of that. I will not pretend there was not. But what I felt more than triumph was something quieter, something that took me longer to name. It was the feeling of a door closing on a room I had lived in for a very long time. Not a slamming, a quiet, definitive click, the sound of something ending. Auntie Ngozi contested the will. Of course she did. She hired a lawyer and she contested on grounds of diminished capacity. She said my father had not been of sound mind when he made the changes. Her lawyer was competent. The case was not nothing. But I was also a lawyer, and I had spent 6 years understanding exactly this kind of law, with exactly this kind of situation somewhere in the back of my mind, always, since I was 12 years old, in a corridor holding a letter. The case ran for 8 months. I will not take you through all of it. What I will tell you is that my father had been careful. His lawyer had been careful. The documentation was thorough. There were witnesses. There was a medical assessment from the time of signing that confirmed his capacity. And there was something else. There was Mr. Adeyemi. Mr. Adeyemi, who had put books on a table for a small boy every afternoon for years and never asked for anything in return, was still alive. He was very old now and he walked with a stick, but his mind was as sharp as it had ever been. And when I called him and explained what was happening, he said, "I will come." He had known my father, not well, but enough. He had watched me as a child. He had seen things. And when he sat in that hearing room and he spoke about what he had observed over many years, quietly and specifically and without drama, there was something in his voice that was simply true. You cannot manufacture that. Either something is true or it is not. And when it is, people in rooms can feel it. The case was decided in my favor. I want to tell you what I did after. I did not go to the house and take things. I did not arrive with a list. I did not do any of the things that Auntie Ngozi, I think, had imagined I might do, the things she would have done if the positions had been reversed. I had watched her operate for too long to want to imitate her. What I did was sit down with Chidi and Amara separately, not together, because they are different people with different relationships to what happened, and I wanted to speak to them as the people they were, not as their mother's children. Chidi was guarded. He had grown up in that house too, and he had grown up knowing that the difference between me and him was something his mother had arranged, and I think he had spent his life trying not to think about what that meant. I did not blame him for his guardedness. I told him that what had happened between our parents, between his mother and my father, was not his debt to pay. I told him that as far as I was concerned, we were brothers. I meant it. Amara cried. She said she was sorry. She said she had known when they were children that things were not fair, and she had not known how to say it. I told her the same thing I told Chidi. I told her it was not her debt. I told her to live well. I told her that was enough. Auntie Ngozi I did not speak to, not because I could not, but because there was nothing true that I needed to say to her, and I had spent enough of my life in proximity to her calculations. I was done. There is a thing that happens, I have found, when you have spent a very long time waiting for something and it finally arrives.
You expect to feel a particular way, complete, resolved, the long story finally over. But what actually happens is more complicated. You feel the arrival of the thing, and then you feel underneath it all the years that came before it, all the thin mattresses and the leftover food and the scholarship application you did not submit because of a threat in a doorway, all the studying by street lamplight, all the careful, invisible building of yourself in a house that did not want you to become anything. You feel all of that, and you understand that what you have been given, the land, the house, the legal recognition of your place in your father's story, is real and it matters, but it is not the thing you actually wanted. It never was. What you wanted was simpler and more impossible. You wanted your father to have seen you clearly from the beginning. You wanted your mother not to have died when you were 7. You wanted the years back, the dinners where you ate first, the bedroom with a window, the ordinary, unremarkable experience of being a child who was loved without conditions attached to it. You cannot have those things. No court can give them to you. No will can restore them. What you can have is what comes next. And I have learned in the years since that what comes next is not nothing. It is not nothing to stand on land that has your name on it. It is not nothing to call Chidi on a Sunday and hear his voice and know that something that was broken has, if not repaired, at least acknowledged. It is not nothing to think of Mr. Adeyemi walking into a hearing room with his walking stick and his grey cardigan and his clear and true voice. It is not nothing to have built yourself in the dark and then walked finally into the light. I am Emeka Obi. I grew up in my father's house as something between a son and a burden. I taught myself in a library by the light of a street lamp. I built a life out of knowledge because knowledge was the one thing nobody could take from me. And I want to tell you something that I have come to believe in the years since all of this happened, with the particular certainty of someone who has seen it proven. What is yours will find you. It may take longer than it should. It may cost more than it ought. The road to it may be so long and so difficult that you will stop believing it exists. But what is yours will find you. God does not forget, and neither does the truth.